Hello people and welcome to Interesting Shit in History with your host, me, Danny B. So for today's show we have... And in order to answer this question, we need to take things back to the year 1857. Now the British were just the latest in a long line of foreign occupiers of India at this time, because that's where we are. Maybe I should have declared that earlier, although your dairy owner is Indian, so you kind of should have figured that. Now, whilst trying to get statistics from 150 years ago isn't the easiest of things to be done, luckily for us the British were great record keepers, so thus we know India had a population of about 200 million people, whilst Britain had a population of 22 million people. And so to make up this difference, the British employed huge numbers of Indian soldiers in their army called sepoys. And because there had been such a long history of different peoples and different nations and empires coming into India and setting up their own empires and using local rulers, the British and the Indians got along relatively well, which gets us to where we're at, which is where shit starts to get interesting. So at this period of time, the average weapon in the world that was used universally was a flintlock musket. Now, whilst we are still about 30 years away from the invention of modern bullets as we know them today, recently there had been a technological innovation in the form of paper cartridges. Now these bad boys, which contained all of the gunpowder and bullets and everything else required to fire one of these flintlock muskets, had to be loaded from the front end instead of the bottom end because that little piece of technology hadn't been invented yet. And in order to fit, they had to be greased, which is where our story starts to get really interesting because of the origin of this grease. Now, whilst this isn't true, a rumour started in India that the bullets were being covered in beef or pork grease, and this is true, you can look it all up, which of course would have been a problem because large portions of the population were Hindu and Muslim, which was somewhat problematic considering to fire the bullet the end had to be ripped off of the teeth, thus the possibility of bringing potential beef or pork fat into your mouth, which if you were a devout Hindu or Muslim, which people were at the time, was a very big problem. And there had been other issues in India around succession of local princes and stuff, but really this is what kicked off the Indian Mutiny of 1857. Beef and pork. There you go. Now, there was one other large demographic in India, the Sikhs. Now, for those who don't know much about the Sikh faith, it's quite a tolerant and liberal religious system. There's no culinary restrictions around the food that you could eat, or pork, beef or anything like that. So thus, when the other Indian groups, Muslims and Hindus, were getting upset over the beef and pork issue, the Sikhs didn't give a fuck. So when the mutiny happened in India and there were big uprisings, the Sikhs stayed loyal to British power, and thus, once the mutiny was overthrown, large parts of that same British Indian army was made up of Sikh troops. They fought with British soldiers in the First and Second World War, and then in 1947, when the British rule of India was over and Mahatma Gandhi and all that stuff, the Sikhs, who were afraid of getting persecuted because they'd been persecuted before the British had showed up in India, decided to go home with us. Which is why your dairy owner has a turban. I hope you enjoyed this. If you got more questions, more interesting shit from history, I'd love to hear it. Peace out.